Number 10. Magic. Ilyana Rasputina is Colossus' younger sister. She originally joined the X-Men with some basic teleportation powers. At a young age, she was kidnapped and taken to Limbo by Belasco. She also got some sweet magical training. Belasco put part of her soul in a bloodstone and told her that he loved her while she was 6 years old. Yeah, it's creepy. Creepy. And while she was in there, she was also beaten, and it wasn't until her rescue by Shadow and Cat, and later her continued training under Belasco, that granted her the power to overtake her kidnapper and become the Queen of Limbo, and eventually leave this reality she was trapped in. Upon her return to the X-Men, she was souped on magic, had her teleportation powers, and was also armed with her weapon, Soul Sword. She kind of gave me some Leona vibes from League of Legends, which just adds to her powerful presence in my mind. Number 9. Colossus. That's right, Magic's big bro, Pyotr Rasputin, is also on this list. Given the codename Colossus, after agreeing to attend Professor Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, he is able to change his skin to armor at will. His armor is durable, strong, and almost impenetrable. To give you an idea of just how tough Colossus is, I will point you to a moment where he took on the Juggernaut. Yeah, that's right. While his armored skin is susceptible to damage from adamantium and vibranium, his armor is otherwise impenetrable. And you all saw how much of a beating he took in the first Deadpool movie when he took on Angel. Oddly enough, the Deadpool version of Colossus is more accurate than the X-Men film version of him. I guess we'll see if Colossus gets to remain as overpowered and Russian in the MCU. But hopefully we will be safe from American Colossus, cause that's a version that maybe needs to be stopped. Number 8. Archangel. One of the original founding members of the X-Men, Archangel, also known as Warren Worthington III, was first introduced in X-Men comics in the first issue of X-Men Volume 1, although at the time he went by the name Angel. This X-Men was born with actual wings, though his parents apparently did not notice the markings on his back that would lead to him growing wings later, and for the most part, he lived a normal life, somehow concealing his wings. Odd, right? At an early age, he became a vigilante hero, adopting the name Angel, and after joining the X-Men later changed his name to Archangel. Doesn't sound like he needs to be stopped, right? Well, think again. During the X-Factor series, he received a devastatingly overpowered upgrade when he became one of Apocalypse's horsemen. He grew biometallic wings that were retractable, razor sharp, and could fire neurotoxin feathered darts. Ouch. Don't worry though, Archangel was stopped, in a sense, reverting to his former self after his biometallic wings molted. Yeah, because apparently metal feathers also molt? I don't know, who knew? Number 7. Storm. One of the most unique X-Men in terms of her origin story, Storm, also known as Aurora Monroe, was worshipped as a goddess when her powers first emerged, in contrast to most of her fellow X-Men who were, spurned for their abilities. While most of what we see in the comics and animated and live-action adaptations is Storm's abilities to influence only localized weather, when prompted, her powers can be as dramatic as her accent in the X-Men film series from the 2000s. Storm suffers from some intense claustrophobia stemming from childhood trauma, and it is this fear that has prompted her full potential to be unleashed. Look at X-Men Volume 1 Issue 147, where Aurora creates a severe storm that encompasses the whole Earth, threatening all of humanity, and being likened in the issue to the Phoenix. Adding Storm's powers into the mix in a world that is already suffering dramatically from global warming is next level risky. The world definitely doesn't need any more large scale natural disasters, thank you very much. Number 6. Cyclops. Often the leader of the X-Men team, Cyclops made this list less for his abilities and more for his sometimes questionable behavior and choices. He has some of the weirdest powers for someone who is an original member of the team. The ability to basically fire laser beams from his eyes. This power is so intense that it actually requires Cyclops, aka Scott Summers, to wear a visor in order to control his powers. Granted, apparently his eyelids are also strong enough to stop the lasers completely, which is weird, but hey, mutants, superheroes, comics. Moving past this ability, which can be very dangerous when left uncontrolled in and of itself, we also have to deal with the moral dilemmas created by some of Scott's actions. In Avengers vs. X-Men, his actions led to the return of the Phoenix Force and death of Charles Xavier by his own hand, after becoming full-on obsessed with the power of the Phoenix. Cyclops also tends to be loyal to his beliefs to a fault. In House of X, when steered towards Magneto's philosophies, we see him turn borderline villain, trying to forcefully separate mutant children from their non-mutant parents in an effort to protect them. Yeah. Number 5. Hope Summers. not biologically related to Scott Summers. She's actually adopted into the Summers and Gray family. Hope has the potential to actually be the strongest X-Men out there, the most OP. She can duplicate other mutants' powers just by being near them. Similar to Rogue, but she doesn't actually need to make physical contact, and she doesn't drain them of life energy or their own powers while duplicating. However, it still makes her a formidable foe for any mutant. She can also take on a seemingly unlimited number of powers at a time. So if you team her up with a huge X-Men team, she would be pretty unstoppable. Combine this with the fact that she was raised by the badass Cable, and you have a next level X-Men on your hands. Not only this, but the Phoenix Force has always been fond of Hope. When Hope and the Phoenix Force merged, she became the White Phoenix, the only person who appeared to be able to not be driven mad by the Phoenix's power. And she was the only one strong enough to dispel its energy with the help of Scarlet Witch. That isn't overpowered. I don't know what is. Number 4. Wolverine. Is there such a thing as too much Wolverine? I'd like to say no, but at this point I'm starting to think there just might be. Wolverine is now seen as probably one of the most popular X-Men and superheroes of all time. He has even held Avenger status, making everyone obsess over the thought of perhaps getting to see him join the MCU in the Avengers Infinity War Endgame post-credits, which sadly for Wolverine fans did not happen. Wolverine, aka James Howlett, or better known as just Logan, boasts of a mutation involving retractable bone claws and regenerative healing abilities. After having adamantium added to his skeleton, he became even more powerful. He has had more thrown at him than most superheroes, and as a result, we have seen his powers expanded in the comics. He's also known to age slowly, one of the few characters where we actually address this issue of, like never seeming to age. At one point, he was even considered immortal, having a pact with Azrael, the Angel of Death, that if he could beat him in a fight after dying, he would get to be resurrected. In Old Man Logan, when he's actually considered to be weaker, he still manages to battle an alternate version of the Hulk. Granted, Logan really only needs to be stopped if you feel like you've had too much of him. Have you? Number 3. Rogue. With her power-stealing and life-draining abilities, Rogue, aka Anna Marie LeBeau, is one of the most insanely overpowered X-Men around. Considering she has also played the villain before, she might also be one to consider, putting a stop sign in front of. Like hold up. Before joining the X-Men, Rogue was a runaway who was taken in by Mystique and the Brotherhood of Mutants. She almost killed Miss Marvel, now known as Captain Marvel, by touching her. Rogue was used to temporarily taking mutants' powers and weakening them, but in Miss Marvel's case, she held on a little bit too long, stealing Carol Danvers' powers in a more permanent sense and leaving her in a coma. Rogue also accidentally absorbs her psyche without intending to. Her level of powers and lack of control are the most concerning. Though of course, in the X-Men Legacy series, Rogue gains full control of her abilities after Danger and Professor X were able to figure out how her abilities work and alter her mind to help her gain control, allowing her to kiss Gambit. I love those two together. Number 2. Professor X. What's more terrifying than a mutant who can read your mind and the minds of everyone else on the planet all at once, at any distance? One who can also influence your mind, possibly without you knowing. Hence why Professor Charles Xavier makes number 2 on the list. Granted, Professor X usually uses his abilities for good, but as we see in the film Logan, even the best intentions may not protect those you love from the darker sides of one's powers. In Logan, we see an aged Professor X masterfully played by the only Professor X in my mind, Sir Patrick Stewart. This version of Charles is suffering from a degenerative brain disease that affects his memories, causes seizures, and causes him to lose control of his powers as well. And we learn that the worst has happened. He has supposedly, accidentally, used his powers to kill members of the X-Men and hurt countless numbers of people as well. Yikes. Poor Patrick Stewart. Number 1. Jean Grey. The only person unchained who could be scarier than Professor X Unchained would be Jean Grey, especially when under the influence of the Phoenix Force. You may be thinking at this point that the Phoenix Force is the real star of this list, and hey, you may be right. I definitely have a Phoenix obsession of my own. However, the fact remains that what the Phoenix Force really gives you is access to your full potential. And this is terrifying with Jean because her full potential is insane. Granted, originally in the comics, Phoenix was a separate entity that existed while Jean was chilling and healing in a cocoon under the ocean, but in the films and animated series, Phoenix has been presented as a melding of minds, which is also how it has been explained in later comics like with the Phoenix 5. Jean is one of the strongest X-Men ever, a stronger telepath than Charles Xavier. While her influence over a mind may not be as finessed or as subtle as his, she could definitely control your mind in a similar way. The only difference is you would probably know she was doing it as opposed to maybe thinking the actions were of your own volition. While both these scenarios are equally terrifying, the idea of knowing you have no control over your actions while trying to fight back and losing is, in my mind, even more terrifying.
And at number 10, Karma. Karma is a character who first appeared in Marvel Team-Up issue 100 back in 1980. She came from Vietnam, having fled the country with her family during the war. She was one of the founding members of the New Mutants. Now Karma has powerful psionic abilities that allow her to physically possess others, meaning she can take possession of the minds of humans or animals. This occurs by Karma projecting a psionic energy surge that overwhelms their consciousness and renders her victim unconscious, with Karma's own mind taking the wheel, so to speak. When Karma is in control, she can do some real damage, having the ability to alter her victim's memories, perceptions, reveal information to her, or have them fall asleep. She can even make their body work as if it were an extension of her own. But if she stays too long with a host, she risks her own personality becoming a subordinate to that host personality, becoming more and more like her victim. After an incursion with the Shadow King, Karma also gained the ability to mentally see through others' eyes, and she can protect herself from the psychic assault of others. Moving on to number 9, Joseph. Joseph, who only operates by a first name, is the clone of Magneto, but kind of sucks in comparison to him. This is why he's a bit baffling to some. He is a mutant clone who first appeared in Uncanny X-Men issue 327 from 1995, but he also died in a battle against the real Magneto and had a thing for Rogue really briefly. Now his abilities in theory should be the same as Magneto's if he's the iconic villain's clone, right? Well, that is not the case, hence why he's on this list. Sure, he is capable of generating powerful magnetic fields, but he can also generate electricity and electromagnetic radiation. And the real kicker? Well, he doesn't have the full range of Magneto's powers. He never demonstrated the same extent of those powers or some of the tricks that Magneto has been able to pull off over the years, like producing a wormhole. He lacks the mental barriers Magneto has, and therefore when he manipulates a ton of energy, he often causes damage to himself. Sucks for you, Joseph no last name. Moving on to number 8, Husk. Many people might assume that Husk has shape-shifting abilities, but that is not the case. The character who first appeared in ROM Annual Issue 3 in 1984 has the ability to remove one layer of skin, or husk if you will, which then reveals a different layer of skin made out of an entirely different composition. So essentially, she sheds one layer of skin, and the layer of epidermis beneath can be something the likes of metal or stone or something entirely different. She's a metamorph who has made her skin into glass, wood, rubber, diamond, granite, brick, and even adamantium in the past. This can increase her weight, strength, or invulnerability in the process depending on the material. So she becomes diamond, she becomes impervious to an extent. Rubber, she gets bouncy. She even once generated heat and flame and has even produced acidic skin. Now aside from being kinda gross, think of like all that dead skin she sheds, it's easy to see why some would mistake Husk for a shapeshifter. Although technically speaking she kind of is, but it's a weird process in which she does it, and very limited. Can just be her skin. And at number 7, Sage. Sage is a character who debuted back in 1980, appearing in the X-Men issue 132. And she has a variety of mental abilities that can often be a tad confusing. Think of Sage like a supercomputer. Her brain has unlimited storage capacity. She can recall anything at any time with perfect clarity, and the speed of her thoughts allows her to analyze her surroundings for data within seconds, almost instantaneously. She's like a back computer. In addition to that, she can calculate probability of events based on said data. Sage can multitask too, completing various actions all at once in her brain. And if that wasn't wild enough, she has perfect control over her body because of her superpowered mind, meaning she can recreate any physical actions that she's seen once, as long as they are within the parameters that her body is capable of. She can even see a person's genetic code and read their DNA, and selectively evolve existing genetic traits, which can tap into latent abilities, although she can't reverse the procedure, which has caused unpredictable side effects in the past. She is a walking, talking bat computer. Up next at 6, Lockheed. Lockheed is a literal dragon. Well, actually he is an alien dragon who was Kitty Pryde's longtime companion and a member of both the X-Men and Excalibur teams. First appearing in the Uncanny X-Men issue 166 from 1983, this little dude does a lot more than just your typical dragon stuff of flying and projecting fire. And he is also the size of a cat, which is kind of super adorable. Lockheed comes from a race of advanced dragon-like extraterrestrials who can travel through space via astral ships that transport their essence, which kinda seems absolutely absurd. Now, because of his empath abilities, he is able to understand human speech despite not being able to speak it all that well, and is immune to telepathic probing. So he's not just a cat-sized dragon after all. Although, I mean, would you rather have a real dragon or a tiny dragon that was cat-sized? Personally, I would go for the cat-sized dragon. Much more manageable and, like, adorable too. And at 5, Revanche. Revanche, who debuted in 1993 in X-Men issue 17, is one of a few characters on this list whose powers are not only confusing, but so is their origin story. So Revanche's early appearances were plagued by continuity errors in Marvel's comics thanks to one of her creators, Fabian Nicieza, failing to read Uncanny X-Men issue 255. In that issue, the character Psylocke is discovered on the shores of an island by the Hand, whereas in issue 22 of the second volume of X-Men, a handful of issues after Revanche's debut, her origin story contradicted the one in Uncanny X-Men, with the character having come to possess Psylocke's body. Confusing, right? Revanche was said to have been an intuitive empath prior to switching bodies with Psylocke, but after switching bodies she gained telepathic abilities and could psionically generate a blade, a Psyblade that she could use to force her way into other telepathic characters' minds. So essentially she is Psylocke but not Psylocke and used to be an empath and is just a big jumble of continuity errors. Yeah, no bueno. Up next, number 4, Xorn. Xorn is a confusing character to begin with. Is he his own dude? Is he Magneto? Does that mean Magneto can do a bunch of other stuff like manipulate gravity and turn his sun head into a black hole? Lots of questions, friends. So, for starters, Xorn is a dude who first showed up in New X-Men Annual 2001 as a Chinese mutant who had a star for a brain. That's why he wears his little helmet. He ended up becoming the subject of an incredibly confusing retcon, in which he was revealed to be Magneto, who had actually died in the Planet X storyline prior. It made little sense. Then it was revealed in Excalibur Volume 3 Issue 1 that Magneto never died at all, which meant Xorn wasn't actually Magneto, and that led to a whole confusing storyline that featured Xorn's brother, who was kinda like his twin, and overall it was just a big mess. Now that could largely be the reason why so many fans find Xorn and his abilities perplexing. But even when Xorn was revealed not to be Magneto after all, his brother shared very similar powers to him, and was technically the second Xorn, and there were a bunch of major differences. Rather than having a sun in his head that his helmet covered, his brother had a black hole there. I mean, similar but very, very different things. The original Xorn also had healing powers, electricity and magnetism generation and manipulation, the ability to teleport via time-space wormholes, gravity manipulation, telepathy, and was self-sustaining. So yeah, that's a whole lot of powers to cram into one dude who may or may not be Magneto, but probably wasn't. Baffling. Moving on to number 3, DAZZLER. DAZZLER is often one of the most ripped on mutant characters in the comics, thanks to her publication origins. Initially, DAZZLER, aka Alison Blair, was commissioned by Casablanca Records in 1978 as an animated special multimedia cross-promotion called The Disco Queen. Casablanca would bail on the project thanks to financial concerns, but the Disco Queen would live on, first appearing in the Uncanny X-Men issue 130 in 1980 as DAZZLER. DAZZLER's abilities, which are yet another source of her history of mockery, include the power to convert sound into light beams of various forms and intensity. She is also a trained singer, actress, and dancer, and of course is a highly accomplished roller skater. No joke on that last one. Arguably, the sound conversion trick of hers is the most confusing. She takes sonic vibrations which reach her body and transduces them into light. She has a large range of frequencies that she can do this with all kinds of sound pressures regardless of complexity, dissonance, or randomness being changed and converted, meaning a song and the sound of a car skidding could both be converted into light. So, what do these light beams do? This is where it gets even a little bit more baffling. She can temporarily blind people by creating a pulse of light of several thousand watts. She can create a cascade of sparkling lights that messes with people's equilibrium. She can create a strobe effect, which is no good for people who have epilepsy, and she can create rays of light that use patterns to produce trance-like effects in her victims. DAZZLER can generate enough ultraviolet light to melt large metal objects. She can even use those light rays to create holograms and has used light energy to generate flight, which I don't quite understand, but that's okay. The more you know. And at number 2, Maggot. Maggot is a character that we've discussed a handful of times on our channel thanks to his absurd abilities. He has a slug-based digestive system. Oh, and he also is psychometric. Now, First appearing in Uncanny X-Men issue 345 from 1997, Maggot is a fellow whose digestive system is quite unique. Where his intestines should be, he has a hollow cavity that's home to a pair of semi-sentient slugs, or maggots, hence the name. He's named those slugs Eenie and Meanie. Eenie and Meanie can burrow themselves out of his torso, and at super fast speeds, they attack a foe or object with a powerful enzyme, which then processes and digests said object, or person. From there, they come back to Maggot, crawl back into his hollow cavity, and then transmit the food energy they collected to him, which then can supercharge him and allow him to do a variety of things like increase his strength, physical size, his sturdiness, stamina, etc. If the slugs don't re-enter his belly, this process does not work. And in the past, he's actually lost one of his slugs too. He doesn't get another one. He's left with one slug, which means I guess half of the abilities of digestive power with one slug. And finally, in at number 1, Darwin. Darwin is a peculiar character. First appearing in 2006, X-Men Deadly Genesis issue 2, he's a mutant who has reactive evolution powers. When he was first born, his mother practically disowned him because of his abilities, and later he was experimented on by scientists until Moira McTaggart recruited him. So what does reactive evolution mean in Darwin's case? Well, his body automatically adapted to his environment or circumstances, which allows him to survive anything, although the extent of that capability has never been fully defined in the comics. Now in the past, he's gained night vision in the dark, he's grown gills when in water, he became fireproof when his skin was exposed to an open flame. But it's not just basic physical transformations with him. He once converted his entire body into pure energy. He has increased his own intelligence. He morphed into a sponge when he was shot at with a weapon meant to destroy one's nervous system. He has learned different languages by merely looking at them. And when facing off against the Hulk, his body teleported him away from the battle. That last bit is interesting because Darwin doesn't have a choice over how his body reacts. While he may have chosen to increase his strength when fighting against the likes of the Hulk, his body sensed the best means of survival was to teleport him away from the battle. His body is even proven to process alcohol faster when drinking, preventing him from getting drunk. It's a tough life for Darwin. And at number 10, ELIXIR. ELIXIR, aka Josh Foley, first appeared in 2003 in New Mutants Volume 2, Issue 5. Funny enough, he was initially a member of an anti-mutant group called the Reavers, until his powers manifested and he's kicked out of the group, causing him to reluctantly join the Xavier Institute for Higher Learning after his parents also kick him out of his home. Speaking of his powers, ELIXIR is able to control the biological structure of any organic matter, which also includes his own body, as long as he is in proximity of his target. This means he can do things like heal others, restore and boost mutant powers, create painful and life-threatening ailments, like boils, welts, and even fatal tumors, cure the legacy virus, and even cause death. He can sense when people are sick or if there are any abnormalities in their body. He can also regenerate on a cellular level, and resurrect himself, meaning he is pretty much immortal. And at number 9, Vulcan. Initially introduced in 2006 in X-Men Deadly Genesis issue 1, Vulcan, aka Gabriel Summers, is the younger brother of Cyclops and Havoc. While he's known more so for being a supervillain, the character once upon a time was part of the X-Men team. Energy is Vulcan's jam. He can psionically manipulate, transform, control, and absorb vast amounts of energy, including energy on the electromagnetic spectrum and from exotic sources, such as Cyclops' optic blasts, or even magically created energy. He can even tap into and suppress mutant energies if he'd like, and can produce light, heat, force, you name it. This also allows him to fly and survive in space. And at number 8, Kid Omega, aka Quentin Quire. Quentin Quire first appeared in New X-Men issue 134 back in 2003, joining the Xavier Institute. He quickly became one of Xavier's most favored students, with the professor attempting to help him control his powers. But Quentin takes a bit of a turn for the worse when he decides to start up the Omega Gang, a group of teenage mutants whose goal it was to exact revenge for the death of a famous mutant fashion designer. That, and he is super depressed about a girl not liking him back, and the fact that he was adopted. Dude has fragile self-esteem. Anywho, what can he do? Well, he has advanced precognitive and telepathic abilities that not only allow him to think at immense speeds, but to manipulate the minds of others, resist mind probes, and he can psychically influence a large group of people at one time. He's even created an entire universe in his mind that he calls the Construct that he can imprison people within. Minus his previous gang shenanigans, Quentin generally acts in the interest of good, having recently been featured a member of the Fresh Start iteration of the West Coast Avengers. And at 7, Magik, aka Ileana Rasputina. Magik is the younger sister of Colossus, and first debuted in Giant Size X-Men issue 1 back in 1975. Now despite that, her character was merely a background character for the most part, and it wasn't until 8 years later that she was given a proper name in the Uncanny X-Men issue 160 in 1982, after aging 7 years in the paranormal dimension of Limbo, where she gained her mutant abilities. This includes interdimensional teleportation, magic manipulation, and the use of something called Soul Sword, which is something created by her own life force energy. A physical sword that with each use becomes more powerful. She can also manifest eldritch armor. During her time in Limbo, Magik became the sorceress supreme of that dimension, able to cast a plethora of spells using a mix of black magic and white magic, being taught the latter by an alternate universe version of Storm. She's also capable of creating powerful mind-blocking shields, keeping the likes of some of the strongest telepathic mutants out of her head, including Professor X. In at number 6, X-Man Nate Gray. Scott Summers and Jean Grey are responsible for some of the most powerful offspring in the mutant community, regardless of whether or not they actually intended to parent them. It's worth noting that Nate Gray is not Cable. Both characters are descendants of genetic material from Scott Summers and Jean Grey, but came to be in different manners, with Nate being grown in a laboratory in an alternate dimension thanks to Mr. Sinister, who used Scott and Jean's DNA to do so. Cable, on the other hand, is the son of Scott and Madeline Pryor, who is the clone of Jean Grey. Anywho, with that out of the way, let's talk about Nate. He has the ability to tap into the enormous psychic resources found in the astral plane, which allows him to manipulate matter and energy. His powers were diminished, though, by the Omega Machine. He's a character whose powers sometimes inflate and sometimes are taken away in the comics. He can also exist as living psychic energy, existing outside of his corporeal form. He was given his own solo series during Age of Apocalypse that briefly replaced Cable's series, and his series ended up running until 2001 as he was brought into the Earth 616 continuity, with it ending with his seemingly sacrificial death after struggling for years with being the most powerful person in a reality in which he did not belong. How tragic. Speaking of Scott and Jean's offspring, in at number 5, Rachel Summers. Rachel Summers was created by Chris Claremont and John Byrne, first appearing in the Uncanny X-Men issue 141 back in 1981. But she didn't become Rachel Summers until after her debut, thanks to retcons. Gotta love a retcon. From an alternate future, she's the daughter of Cyclops and Jean Grey, the sister of Nate Gray, and a half-sister of Cable's. And she's hella strong. Not only has she had the Phoenix Force's abilities, she's also an empath, telepathic, telekinetic, and can astral project. She has limited time manipulation abilities too, and her telekinesis abilities can remotely manipulate matter, including on a subatomic level. And at number 4, Legion, aka David Haller. Legion, also known as David Charles Haller, is the son of Professor Charles Xavier. He traveled 20 years into the past in order to kill Magneto before his father's nemesis had the chance to amass power. But before he could, he ended up killing his father instead, which caused the Age of Apocalypse timeline to occur. Legion is often depicted as an anti-hero, and is known for his severe dissociative identity disorder, which formed after his mutant powers manifested during a terrorist attack in which he ended up absorbing the mind of the terrorist leader into his own. Because of his trauma, parts of David's personality splinter, each controlling a different aspect of his powers. Speaking of powers, why is he so strong aside from his parentage? Well, he can reality warp, he can shapeshift, he can manipulate matter and is capable of transmutation. He can manipulate energy, he's telepathic, telekinetic, he can teleport, and of course, he can time travel. But because of his severe dissociative identity disorder in later story arcs, he's often sedated or hospitalized. Reed Richards, Madison Jeffries, and Dr. Nemesis would later create something called a neutral switchboard wristband that would help him control his multiple personalities and better manage his powers. And in X-Men Legacy, he ended up erasing himself from existence altogether, but even that didn't fully work out for him. Poor Legion. And at number 3, Hope Summers. Hope Summers first appeared in X-Men issue 205 in 2007 as part of the X-Men Messiah Complex storyline. After Decimation, a story event in which Scarlet Witch used her powers to turn all of the mutants into regular depowered humans, Hope was the first mutant to be born, which starts a hunt for the character. She's saved by Cable, who names her after her adopted mother who looked after the child with him, and Summers technically being Cable's last name. Hope is a vessel of the Phoenix Force, and has unspecified limits when it comes to physically manipulating and mimicking the powers of other mutants. So yeah, in the scope of things that could be super deadly later on down the line when mutant characters have been established in the MCU. Hope's mimicry abilities allow her to use those mutant powers at their utmost capacity, but because of this, she is potentially incredibly dangerous to people and the environment around her due to the massive amounts of power levels that she generates. Talk about a walking bomb. And at number 2, Jean Grey. Let's be honest here, Jean Grey is 100% going to be added to the MCU. It's almost inevitable, but the chances that we'll be seeing the Phoenix Force flexing its OP-ness on the big screen are pretty slim, at least for now. If anything, since the Phoenix Force is a major part of the X-Men stories, we think that if Jean does become the Phoenix, it'll be an event that's built up over time in the MCU, similar to what was done with the Infinity Gauntlet story arc. So really, Jean's Phoenix is just too strong for the MCU right now, but who knows what the future will hold. Regardless, she is OP as hell. And finally, in at number 1, Franklin Richards. Franklin Richards is the son of Mr. Fantastic Reed Richards and Invisible Woman Sue Storm. And he's one incredibly powerful kid, that's for damn sure. First introduced in 1968 in Fantastic Four Annual Issue 6, Franklin is way beyond an Omega level mutant, having vast reality manipulating powers along with psionic powers. This means he can manipulate matter and energy on a cosmic scale, project energy, is capable of telekinesis, telepathy, astral projection, and precognition. He can teleport, and these two things are great, he's immortal, and can create pocket universes. The kid can create his own damn universes. Celestials consider him to be on par with them, and his powers only increase the older he gets. So yeah, I'm sure we'd all love to see what Marvel Studios would do with a character like that. And to be fair, we're sure Franklin Richards is far from being up on the silver screen. The MCU still needs to establish his parents first. And some people have theorized that that won't happen until after Phase 5, so long way to go, friends. Long way to go.
In at number 10, Deadpool. Now, while it's still disputed as to whether or not Deadpool is an official member of the X-Men, but his involvement with Colossus and the fact that he's actually stayed at Xavier's school is enough for us to include him on this list. With a healing factor that would make Wolverine jealous, Deadpool puts his immortality to full use in not only the films but the comic books as well. Aside from the multiple suicide attempts, Deadpool has been the victim of decapitation and dismemberment several times. People such as Carnage, the Hulk, and even Wolverine have all done their best to separate the merc from his mouth. The story of how Deadpool gained his immortality is really interesting though. When Thanos discovers that Wade is in love with the literal personification of death, Thanos curses Deadpool with the inability to die, just so the two can't be together. Thanos was so jealous of Deadpool he accidentally made him immortal. In at number 9, Archangel. The story of Warren Worthington coming back is a little bit of a strange one, but regardless, it's an X-Men death and rebirth, just not the rebirth that we were expecting per se. In the storyline, when the Archangel personality takes over Warren and actually attempts to take over the role of Apocalypse, the rest of the X-Force gets pretty worried, and rightfully so, I should add. Anyone who wants to become Apocalypse should be watched closely, but a threat like that for the X-Force meant they needed to terminate Warren. And at the end of it all, it's Psylocke who delivers the execution by stabbing Warren with the life seed. Ultimately, this kills the Archangel, although not for long. As the team is retreating, they spot Warren trudging through the deep snow, except now he's been returned to his original form. However, it's not the same old Warren by a long stretch. This version was almost a blank slate. When he was stabbed with the life seed, it completely erased everything that Warren knew before his death. Later on, this more pure version of Warren is merged again with the Archangel clone, which may be seen as a technicality for some, but for us it's pretty much a resurrection of the original. In at number 8, Nightcrawler. Kurt Wagner's story of rebirth is really touching and speaks to the genuine character that Nightcrawler is. During the Second Coming storyline, Nightcrawler and Rogue were alone fighting against Bastion. Both of their intentions were to protect Hope Summers from the Super Sentinel, and as such they laid it all on the line. When Rogue went down, Kurt attempted to teleport her to safety, yet in the moment that he was about to do that, Bastion stuck his hand through Nightcrawler. So when they arrived on Utopia, he just had Bastion's hand sticking out of his chest and as a result slowly died from his injuries. But when Nightcrawler's soul rose to the heavens, he still continued his good deeds, helping them drive out evil whenever it reared its ugly head in the oasis of heaven. When Kurt's father chose to abuse their connection to attack heaven, Kurt took the opportunity to rematerialize his body back to Earth. But as a result, he had to turn over his own soul. Sure, he was able to return to the land of the living, but now he will never be able to return to heaven. In at number 7, Gambit. Gambit has always been one of my favorite X-Men characters, and therefore I was as happy as can be to mention that the Raging Cajun just won't stay down. In the 2012 17 issue Gambit Solo, the finale saw Gambit perfectly pulling off a prison riot which brought together not only his target, but the British intelligence MI13 and the Uncanny Avengers. As you can imagine, these groups coming together created quite the mess, and while his friends were picking up after him, the heroes actually lost track of the mob boss. The target ended up getting his hands on a gun and delivered a fatal shot to the head of Gambit. With Gambit now lying dead in the arms of Rogue, a member of the MI13 used the magic of Excalibur to reconstruct Gambit's blown apart head, which ended up bringing Gambit back to life and offered up a terrific line of dialogue where Gambit says, "Why do I feel like the day after Mardi Gras?" That's what Mardi Gras feels like. I don't want to go. In at number 6, Jubilee. Jubilee's death and rebirth stories are perhaps some of the coolest storylines out there. Her storylines have seen the hero die more often than the rest of the X-Men characters, but the first was perhaps the most unforgettable. After the House of M, Jubilee and many of the other X-Men had their powers basically turned off as they were captured by the Purifiers. Without their powers, they became easy targets for their enemies. The Purifiers beat them relentlessly and ended up crucifying them on the front lawn of the X mansion. Talk about a grudge. By the time that help arrived, they were all essentially dead. However, when Wolverine carried Jubilee to the sub-basement of the X mansion and gave her a blood transfusion from Angel, the restorative properties of the blood brought life back into her. In at number 5, Rogue. After the events of Avengers vs. X-Men, Rogue fully believed that the Scarlet Witch was going to cast another spell, so she decided to take care of it herself. To do this, she absorbed Wolverine's powers and ran through the Avenger with her new bone claws. Although what she didn't see coming was supervillain the Grim Reaper sneaking up behind her and stabbing Rogue in the back. Her death, while lasting for a few months, was eventually reversed when the Avengers went back in time to stop her first attack on the Scarlet Witch. Classic Avengers just turning back the clocks whenever they don't like when something plays out. Either way, it brought Rogue back into our lives, so I guess it's cool. In at number 4, Colossus. The story of Colossus dying and then coming back to life is every bit tragic as it is remarkable. When Peter's brother died, he felt it was his duty to find the cure for the legacy virus. Although the only way to make the cure airborne was to have the cure injected into a living person for whom it would ultimately kill. Colossus, though, decided this was a sacrifice that he needed to make and chose to inject himself with the cure. This is also the moment that Colossus went from looking human to altering his state into that steel form that we saw him as in the Deadpool films. Years after the run of Astonishing X-Men, a cure of the mutant disease was being developed, but all the X-Men knew was that it was being tested on an unknown subject. When the X-Men arrived to investigate, they soon find out that Colossus has been alive this whole time. He was being held against his will in an underground bunker, and a clone had been put in his place, which would be easy to do if you look like a robot. In at number 3, Cyclops. Scott Summers has actually died twice, but the first was more so the end of the life that he had known up until that point. Allow me to elaborate. During the 12 storyline, Cyclops had become a host for Apocalypse. Apocalypse at it again. And after being freed by the tyrant, Cyclops believed he was dead from the whole thing. But it was only that part of him that had died. Thankfully, Jean and Cable were able to remove Apocalypse from their friend to restore him back to his normal state. Well, as normal as can be. In the second death of Cyclops, we have to jump to Secret Wars 2. These strange mist clouds at the time were kind of floating around, and they were there to sterilize and ultimately kill the mutants all around the world. And one of its victims was Scott Summers. In a recent time travel storyline though, a younger version of his son Cable used a pinch of the Phoenix Force to turn the tides on Cyclops' fate. This ultimately resurrected his father and allowed him to crawl out of his grave. In at number 2, Jean Grey. The death of our beloved Jean Grey has been teased several times throughout the comic books. It gives us a heart attack every single time. But the real death came at the hands of a Magneto clone. A former X-Man himself actually poisoned Jean with a hefty dose of electromagnetism. Although because Jean had fully merged with the Phoenix Force, she was able to bring herself back several times. One of the more important cases of this remanifestation was in the Avengers vs. X-Men storylines. Jean returns to save a power-hungry Cyclops from perishing and also finally makes her full return using the Phoenix Force. However, in the end, she decides to reject this cosmic force and live the rest of her life without it. Lastly, on our number 1 spot, Wolverine. As I mentioned before, Wolverine has some pretty crazy regenerative abilities, but when the miniseries titled Death of Wolverine was released, we all feared his abilities wouldn't be enough this time around. In the miniseries, Logan's healing properties were weakened by a virus, and word of his now diminished state spread rampant throughout the villain community and essentially put a big target on his hairy back. After discovering who was responsible for the virus, Wolverine was covered in this molten adamantium, and as the metal hardened, poor Logan ended up suffocating to death. Although other versions of him remained, this particular Wolverine was resurrected with the help of an Infinity Stone. In the hunt for Wolverine, a group of Reavers track down Logan's body, and what they find though is just the hardened shell of Logan with nothing inside. You see, the X-Men were able to extract his body from the statue using Kitty Pryde's phasing powers. His body was actually buried somewhere else, but we soon saw him alive and well holding the Space Stone for some reason. Little to no explanation as to how exactly he crawled out of the grave, but nonetheless we're happy to see him again.
Number 10, Bloodstorm. Now Storm is already mistress of the elements, so quite powerful and quite interesting. But what happens when she becomes a vampire? Now this has happened briefly in main continuity, but in the Mutant X universe, it became a permanent change. The Mutant X comic series was published from 1998 to 2001, and as mentioned, it saw a very different Storm. This was after she was bitten by Dracula. Here, she was not saved, but instead became a full-fledged creature creature of the night. She of course had vows not to kill, so she had the vampire dilemma, which she solved by hiring some of her former teammates to let her drink from them, like Kitty Pryde. She would eventually leave the X-Men and join a team called the Six. She also turns Gambit into a vampire, even though she warns him he'll regret it, and he does. Spoilers. Listen when people warn you. BLOODSTORM became a breakout character of this series. Number 9, New Sun Gambit. Speaking of Gambit, let's take a look at one of his alternate versions. This is New Sun Gambit, and he hails from Earth 9921. Gambit actually has enormous power potential that was quashed by Mr. Sinister in the main continuity, but that continuity is not all. In this other universe, he was trained to use his abilities even before he had them, and then when this was combined with his full potential and a mystic ceremony, he became something else altogether. The only thing is, the awakening of all these abilities would create a shockwave that would destroy his Earth, forcing him to travel around, and of course he ended up on the 616 Earth, where he ended up befriending Gambit and trying to help him along his way, but didn't tell him who he was. It was after his reveal and Gambit's subsequent disgust that he changed his name to New Sun. Some fans like seeing the full unleashed potential on display of Gambit. Number 8, Basilisk. Not all alternate versions that people like have happy outcomes. Case in point, Basilisk from Earth 11326, an Earth also known as Age of X. Here, Cyclops was incarcerated in a mutants-only facility after the manifestation of his powers as a teenager killed several people, including his parents. He captured the attention of the prison warden Arcade because of his power set, so he made him this very special mask. It looks a lot like the Skull mask from Persona 5, and it's something that people like about this character. In fact, for many, it's what makes him cooler. It is a very menacing looking mask. Now, a lot of this universe had to do with Legion, one of its personalities, and manifesting another world. So for some, it was just a cool concept in general. The mask looked great. Loved the mask. Number 7, Soldier Supreme. Here we have an amalgamated character from Warp World. This was the universe that was created when Gamora had the Infinity Gauntlet, put everybody's souls into the Soul Gem, and then folded that universe in half. As a result of this, the characters were merged and fused together. So you have Marvel characters smushed, and one of those was Captain America, Steve Rogers, and Doctor Strange, Stephen Strange. So I mean, they kind of already had the same name, just spelled differently, so it made it a bit easier. Back there, Dr. Stephen Rogers, but now with a PH. Their stories actually don't fuse too badly. It's World War II, and Stephen Rogers is contracted for a super secret soldier experiment, only it turns out it's a cover for a mystical ceremony instead of for, the scientific one that he actually undergoes. But these mystic rituals still end up enhancing his strength and allowing him to connect with the occult, and he becomes Soldier Supreme. So he has Cap's cowl, but he still has like a mustache. And he was actually one of the heroes who objected to Warp World being completely destroyed at the end of the arc by Adam Warlock. So Warlock found a way to let it still exist and let these characters still exist. It was one of those loopholes. Stephen Rogers did that and kept being a hero. Number 6, Old Man Logan. Would any of our nerd lists be complete without mentioning Old Man Logan? Yes they would, but it just keeps coming up. It's a staple here on Top 10 Nerd. Well, this story is one of the most popular alternate universe stories out there, and it has a famously gross confrontation between the Hulk and Wolverine, or Logan, because he's not Wolverine anymore in this story. Here we have a grizzled old man Logan fighting his way across a supervillain-controlled America, trying to keep his claws sheathed after what he did, which, spoilers, was somehow managing to kill most of the X-Men. This was because he fell for an illusion created by Mysterio. This is a must-read for many fans and a fave Wolverine story for others. Number 5, X-Apes. The X-Men are monkeys, or rather apes. This, funnily enough, spawned off of the Marvel Zombies universe and event. Basically, they're trying anything. That event was just so popular. This did not turn out to be quite the hit that was, but I mean, few things can. But this universe still has its fans. Actually, everybody in this universe are apes or monkeys or animals of some kind. So really, if you enjoy this concept, it's just the whole universe, and you have people like the Ape Avengers and Dr. Octopus. It's made for a certain type of pun-loving individual. It's a bit niche, but for some it sparks joy. Number 4, WITCHBREED. For this we have to go for Neil Gaiman of Sandman fame's 1602 Marvel Comics contribution. It is also an alternate universe story. In this universe, the Marvel universe is all happening by in Elizabethan times, 1602. There, mutants exist, but they are known as WITCHBREED. This is because they are thought to be the spawn of demons or witches, or both. They are creatures to be hunted down, but they find safe haven in Xavier's select college for sons of gentlefolk, a school that causes great concern for Sir Nicholas Fury because he sees the potential of all these students as soldiers, which, let's not lie, that's part of what Xavier is doing. Again, this is a universe where people tend to like the whole thing, but the X-Men stand out as a distinct part, or rather, the Witchbreed. Number 3, X-Babies. Versions of your favorite characters as babies or kids. This is a concept that is either really fun or incredibly lame, depending upon who you're talking to. So the X-Babies are clones created by Mojo in the Mojoverse. This was probably inspired by an even earlier story where he had just taken the X-Men and turned them into kids, again for entertainment. Because you know, if anything goes on long enough, be it show, series, whatever, you're gonna get two things. You're gonna get a child episode and you're gonna get a musical episode. Now the X-Babies are a concept that is short-lived, but they are usually returned to. There is even an A-Babies versus X-Babies. Again, how cool you'll find these tots depends upon your tolerance for baby-related shenanigans. Number 2, Earth X. The version of the X-Men here are depressing, but all of Earth X is depressing actually. After an experiment of Reed Richards goes wrong, or seemingly that's what happened, for once it's not Reed's fault, I know, shock and awe, a population of superpowered beings is produced all over the Earth, and the world drastically alters. To quote The Incredibles, when everyone's super, no one is. Suddenly there's not as much of a reason to hate and fear the X-Men, and they've largely fallen apart. The one character people tend to remember the most that sticks out when they first think of this is Wolverine, who's got a beer gut and is married to Jean Grey, except it's not Jean, it's Madeline Pryor, but he keeps calling her Jean, and it's just sad. Now how exactly is this cooler, you may be asking? Well, it's all in the depiction. It's unique, it's memorable, and part of a well-received work. So for many, that's what makes it cool. And finally, in at number 1, Vampire Wolverine. Wolverine, Lord of the Vampires. If you thought people loved Vampire Storm, then you know that they enjoy Vampire Wolverine. Wolverine has been a vampire more than once. You have what-if stories like the aforementioned Wolverine, Lord of the Vampires. But you also have arcs like Curse of the Mutants, which would also be the arc that left Jubilee as a vampire for a bit. Many have fond memories of the what-if story, where upon successfully turning Storm, Dracula then turns all the rest of the X-Men. Only because of Wolverine's healing factor, he figures out how to use his powers way faster than everybody else, and so he dethrones Dracula and takes over as leader of the vampires. In fact, he leads the new vampire X-Men to take over New York. It's up to the bizarre combination of Doctor Strange and the Punisher to take him down.